Welcome to the Animal Training Fundamentals Podcast, where we have fun with practical application and we get mental with the science of behavior. Put them both together and you get results, solutions for your behavior problems, and the tools you need to achieve your training goals. I'm your host, Barbara Heidenreich. Let's talk training. Hey, animal behavior and training enthusiasts. It's Barbara Heidenreich. I'm back, and I've got a great podcast interview with a special guest, very well renowned in the zoo community. This is an expert that has been all around the world working with many zoos and conservation projects, has made some incredible impact in our community by doing things that no other zoo professional has done, and that's really changed the way we care for animals. I'm not going to keep talking here because I'd rather we just get right into this interview because you're going to learn so much, and that's all there is to it. So rather than listen to me talk, let's get into the podcast. Hey everybody, it's Barbara Heidenreich, and I have a special guest with me today. I have Douglas Richardson. He is a worldwide, and I should say world-renowned, because every conference I've ever been to, everyone's crowded around you, and I can't pull them away from you, just so you know. I have Douglas Richardson with me. He is I shouldn't say animal training consultant. You are a zoo consultant. You consult on basically every aspect there is with the zoo. Isn't that right, Douglas?
Well, I mean, certainly as far as the animal aspect of it, if someone asked me to advise on their finance or their catering, I'd be a little bit like a fish out of water. But anything to do with the animal or animal staff side of things, I'm more than happy, and I would hope competent enough to speak on.
Well, I would say so. I've seen you present numerous times, and you're such a commanding speaker, I should say. Everyone's attention is just riveted on you, and you always have amazing things to share, whether it's about how to set up a situation for animals in a breeding situation, or exhibit design, or basically just rebuilding the zoo, to be quite honest, because you've done that, haven't you?
Well, when I got employed, when I left London Zoo, to become zoological director at Rome in Italy, my remit was basically was to rebuild the zoo, because the last, that was in the very end of the 90s, and their last build was around about the late 1950s. Here was this classic European city zoo that basically I was told, right, just change everything. So incredibly interesting. Yeah.
Well, that's just a little bit of your history. So why don't you go ahead and tell everybody what your background is? Because I kind of jumped ahead there and kind of said a few things that you've done, but maybe you can give us a little backstory about how you got into this whole zoo business.
Okay. As I found out, I'm from Scotland. But I spent my formative years in America, and so I went to high school on the North Shore of Long Island, just outside New York City, and so I'm very familiar with the American systems, and have a huge fondness for America. But I discovered something when I was in high school, maybe junior year, I think. And I mean, obviously we had, and I'm sure it's the same in most high schools, you had a guidance counselor who was there to basically oversee your development. And also I was getting to an age where people would be applying to go to college or university. And I found out from Mr. Pollitt, who was my guidance counselor, that I was incredibly unusual in that I knew what I wanted to do when I grew up. And so I'd always wanted to work in zoos. And that was always incredibly clear on my mind. And I just kind of assumed that everybody knew what they wanted to do. And it turns out that is absolutely not the case. And most people, certainly in high school, have not clue one what they might want to do. So basically, I just thought, okay, right, I'm gonna work in zoos, and I'd arranged a training meeting with the then scientific assistant to Bill Conway at the Bronx Zoo, a guy called Joe Davis. And Joe very kindly invited this 16-year-old in for a meeting, and I basically spent the entire day with him. And it was kind of my first, as well as sitting in his office, but he took me around, and a lot of the behind the scenes stuff that I would never have had access to before. And because I was always fascinated about what went on behind that door that said staff only or keepers only or whatever it might be. And we had the debate or the discussion about, should I go to university or should I go straight into the game and be a zookeeper? And we have to remember, we're talking the mid 1970s. So the teaching zoo at Santa Fe College had only just kind of started. There really wasn't very much in the way of formal education, certainly at tertiary level, for people wanting to work in zoos or study zoo biology or whatever. And so I opted for the practical route and start in as a zookeeper. Which my guidance counselor was quite happy with that. The principal of the high school was not so happy with that, because I was going to throw the curve as far as how many kids, because it was quite an affluent area, and it was about a 99.5% of a graduating class went on to college, university. And the fact that I was definitely not going to do that, he wasn't terribly happy about it. Anyway, I ended up coming back to the UK and getting my first zoo job at Edinburgh Zoo in Scotland, which is where I'm from originally. So a few years there, and then I came back to America. I got offered a job at the Bronx Zoo, and so I was a mammal keeper at the Bronx Zoo. Went back to the UK after a while, worked in a couple of small zoos that don't exist anymore. And then, let's see. Oh, yep. Yes, I was employed as head of carnivores at Howlett Zoo in Kent, one of the John Aspinall facilities. There for a few years, then overseer of carnivores at Dudley Zoo in the Midlands in England. And then came the real turning point in my career. I got hired as head keeper of carnivores at London Zoo, and it was the first external appointment for a head of section in the history of the society. And that was where things really started to change. At the time, London was definitely the center of the zoo and zoological universe. Still is to a lesser extent, but everybody and their mother came through London at one point or another, either working there, stop off on the way to someplace else, and they're there for a conference. And the number of people, the names that I met during my 13 years at London. So starting at head keeper, I left in 99, but I'd been bumped up to curator of mammals. And again, the first curator of mammals without a degree, and also the first one with any animal experience. Which was a novel trip for the rest of the keeping staff, because normally you'd be able to sort of do a snow job on some curator that might think that, sea lions eat oranges or whatever it might be, or ostriches fly. And it was that there where I really was able to implement my ideas on zoo design. London Zoo, a very important architectural site. So one also had the limitations of working with listed structures that you were kind of limited what you could actually do with them. And we also at the time had a very limited capital development budget. So it was probably from an enclosure design perspective is probably where I learned the most, or learned my craft when it comes to zoo design. And much of what I've done in the subsequent years was in a large part based on experiments that I was allowed to carry out at London Zoo, like keeping sloth bears basically behind very, very simple low chain link fencing and hot wire, because no one was really doing that in the 1990s. So and then for that to work, and for be able to adapt, I think what at the time was the largest bear enclosure in any urban zoo in Europe. Then onto Rome, as I mentioned, and basically doing the piece by piece, doing the rebuild of the Rome Zoo, which was an incredibly interesting exercise. I did discover that I did not have the classic European gene for languages. You know, twice a week at Italian classes, and I can probably hold a conversation with an Italian small child with learning difficulties. I probably could have a conversation with them. As for an adult conversation, no. So that made the job doubly difficult, doubly interesting, I suppose. Then I went on to Canada, managing a endangered species breeding facility. It's closed to the public, but that no longer exists. And then on to Singapore, and 3 years as a curator at Singapore. Again, was able to carry out some very interesting build projects, taking what was actually a very good Komodo dragon facility and converting it for sun bears. Was my last big project at Singapore. Then leaving Singapore, Highland Wildlife Park, where I suppose from a zoo design point of view, the designing and building a very large scale polar bear enclosure. I know that the likes of Detroit like to think that they have really big polar bear enclosures. You could probably get about 3 or 4 of theirs into just the male enclosure that I built at the park. I also looked at a very different social dynamic for the polar bears, and so managing them very differently than has traditionally been the case, and which has addressed a number of the classic stereotypic behavioral issues that many of us will be familiar with. I'm happy to talk about that later if you wish. And then in 2018, I decided to go it alone, be my own boss, have no staff, travel the world, just keep it entertaining for myself, deal with a range of projects. So now from assisting zoos with protocols, design issues, tightening up their safety. I'm involved with some quite interesting major conservation projects, breeding for reintroduction project for Arabian leopard in Saudi Arabia, similar one between Korea and Russia, as well as I still manage the European bison EEP, the European equivalent of the SSPs. And so I still do quite a bit of pro bono work, maintained my links with the formal zoo community whilst working for myself. And it seems to be a formula that suits me at this stage of my life.
Amazing. That's just, I don't think most people can say they've done a fraction of that. But that's why I wanted to talk to you, because I think, one of the things that I noticed just walking around a zoo with you in at one of the conferences we attended is that so much of the work that you have done does incorporate behavior. And I think you kind of touched on that when you were talking about the polar bears. And I'm hoping you will go into that a little bit more about how you really think about designing enclosures and habitat specifically is really keeping the animal behavior in mind. So if you don't mind sharing a little bit about what your thought process was in, say, for example, creating the polar bear habitats and how it did facilitate addressing some of those typical behavior problems we see in the more traditional enclosures.
Okay. I think the key for me for any design exercise is having as broad and as deep an understanding of the particular species behavioral repertoire or behavioral capacities when looking at, okay, right, what's involved here. The other important issue is, okay, what's an appropriate social grouping? And because obviously that will affect things like holding areas. If you're looking at, how many monkeys can that particular exhibit hold safely and appropriately and with good welfare, the defining factor is not the exhibit, it's the holding area. Because there'll be times when you have to keep all of those monkeys in the holding area. So if your holding area is only suitable for 15 monkeys, and your enclosure can basically hold 30, basically you can only have 15 monkeys in that facility. So you need to design for the animals that you might have in 10 years' time, not the individuals or the numbers that you have now. So with the bears, it started out as there was a single polar bear left in the UK, a female called Mercedes, older female at Edinburgh Zoo, last zoo polar bear in the UK and Ireland. And so I was tasked with, they'd been thinking about moving her up to the Highland Wildlife Park, which is in the Central Highlands of Scotland, large. Imagine a safari park for Northern Hemisphere cold weather adapted species. And so it was, okay, we need a big enclosure, limited funds, and polar bear enclosures, the cost of construction, design and construction, you're usually looking at millions, be it pounds, euros, dollars, it's always millions. And I didn't have millions, but there was no way I wanted to build anything mediocre. So I knew that size was crucial, given the activity patterns of polar bears. And I'd worked with polar bears in a number of traditional setups from Edinburgh Zoo. I ended up working with the first polar bears that I saw when I was a little kid. They were still at the zoo when I actually started work there. So, so Edinburgh, the polar bears at the Bronx Zoo, Singapore, managing polar bears on the equator. That was a trip. And then looking at, okay, right, here we are in an area which is on the same latitude, give or take a degree, as Churchill in Manitoba. Okay, what can we do here? Had a lot of space available. And so we ended up enclosing an enclosure of very rugged ground of about maybe 4 acres in size, about 1 hectare. And but it was like, okay, containing that size of area would be a cost limitation for most facilities. So I thought, okay, we need to get away from the traditional steel and concrete and moats that are involved with polar bear enclosure boundaries. And I actually went on, and it's an exercise I do for all of my design assignments. One of the first things I do is a very simple Google image search just to see what comes up. And I put in polar bear fence, hit enter. And these couple of images came up of this bunch of tourists standing there with basically an 8-foot or 2.4 meter high deer fence on wooden poles and a polar bear, a wild polar bear on the other side. I thought, okay, this is definitely worthy of more investigation. So I contacted the owner of the this hunting and fishing camp, and he explained to me that because of where they are, and people would come and they'd be hunting caribou or moose or fishing for salmon, and then they'd have their barbecue back at the cabins, and with that smell of cooking meat during the ice-free season, they could get 50 polar bears rocking up to their doorstep, which obviously presents something of a health and safety hazard. So they tried various different methods to keep the bears out, and including things like electric fencing, which on its own did not work. And then they put up this 8-foot deer fence and just standard wire stock fencing. And he sent me some fantastic pictures of like an adult male grabbing hold of it, pulling on it. He said 10 years, they never had a bear come through it, over it, or under it. It's not dug into the ground. There is no overhang. There's no hot wire on it, but it was completely and totally effective. Now, for anybody who understands animal behavior and zoo design, keeping an animal out is a very different proposition than keeping an animal in. So basically, I took this individual's design, very simple design, and then adapted it to be a containment unit with an added level of safety in the form of two different sections of hot wire, one about 7 strands from the ground up, separated from the actual perimeter fence, and then an overhang of maybe 3 or 4 hot wires on a different circuit to see how that would go. And we were testing this with a 26-year-old female polar bear, and we're up in the middle of the Central Highlands. So if it all went horribly wrong, it's not like an escaped polar bear in the middle of the city. It was a much more, worst case scenario would have been a much more manageable situation. And I remember when asked by the board of the Zoological Society, when I explained how I was going to be keeping polar bears in, and the chairman or the director, I can't remember which, said, so basically you're going to be containing polar bears using bits of string and harsh language. And it was like, well, ostensibly, yes. And he said, okay, right. Is it going to work? And I said, I think so. And it was like, what do you mean you think so? I said, look, on any design, any enclosure, if you ask a person who's designing it or who's given the brief for it, right, will this contain the animals? And if they give you a categoric yes, they don't know what they're talking about, because you never know if an enclosure is going to work as a containment area until the animals test drive it. And there's been multiple occasions where animals have escaped within literally seconds of being put into enclosures where the architects and the people involved say, oh no, absolutely, this will work, it'll be perfect, it'll be this, it'll be that. So I said, I'm not going to lie to you and say yes it will, but I am very confident that it will. And it did. It worked incredibly well. We actually had a concern that the area was so big that, and I'd seen this with a couple of the sun bears at Singapore, when they moved from what was ostensibly a concrete pit to this lush planted out forest exhibit, they flipped out. They had been born and grown up in an area where they were surrounded by solid walls. And any activity going on outside that area was happening up here. The fact that they could see distance, they couldn't necessarily see a solid barrier. They'd never dealt with green plants to any significant degree. Whereas the 30-year-old female who was originally wild caught, she adapted as soon as we let her out into the exhibit, strolled around, checked it out, found a nice place in the sun where she could work on her tan. And whereas the youngsters were just completely, they had freaked out. And so we had to bring them into the holding areas, and it was a very gradual process getting them used to it. We thought, right, okay, is Mercedes the polar bear going to react the same way? She did not. And where she was kept previously was not like a big concrete pit. It was a small area, but she had views, and I think that might be quite a crucial aspect. And I think this is one of the things that bothers me considerably about some of the modern polar bear big carnivore exhibits, in that there is too much of an accent on theater, on creating a stage setting, and the animals are ostensibly props, which is also where you get the zoo policies. Oh, well, we've created this highly expensive, wonderful duplication of their natural environment. It's like every animal lives behind a cliff face. And we can't give them any enrichment that's unnatural, because we'd ruin the illusion. Like, our visitors really are fooled into thinking they're in the Congo or the Arctic or the Amazon rainforest. Really? So with the classic exhibits, you see a lot, there is, the way it's set up is the animals have no view out. The visitors might have a lovely view with what looks like a natural backdrop and natural substrate and plants, but if they look closely, the plants are all hot wired off, so the animals can't get anywhere near them. And it is literally a stage setting. From the animal's perspective, all they can see in many cases are the visitors through glass panels or across moats, and there'll be backdrops behind it, and they don't see any distance. There's no, if it is completely enclosed, there's no air exchange. That flows of air are going over the top and not through. And many animals, particularly bears, are stimulated by different smells. Very large part of their brain is to do with their olfactory abilities. Anyway, so we test drove it with the female bear, worked terrifically. We waited for it to touch the hot wire, because you need to know that they understand it. And also important if you're going to put an animal in an enclosure where hot wire is a significant part of the barrier, you need to know that they respect it. So I had them set up a training fence using the same materials at a traditional enclosure at Edinburgh Zoo. Unfortunately, the keepers didn't follow the second part of my request, which was, can you watch her until she touches the hot wire so you see what happens? So we actually didn't know. So we had to watch her on the way out, and she walked about 2/3 of the perimeter. She'd been in the pool, climbed back out, soaking wet. And as polar bears do, she touched the hot wire with her nose. All 4 legs buckled. I thought I'd killed her. And then she got back up, shook herself off, and then carried on her patrol of the perimeter. Never touched the hot wire again. Now, from that big enclosure now contains 2 adult males, which each weigh in excess of half a ton. And same fence, same height, same hot wire, and 10 years on, 11 years on, that enclosure safely contains 2 big male polar bears. So it was, I am completely confident with it. And a number of places now are copying it. The Yorkshire Wildlife Park was the first one to duplicate the design. A few more on the continent. I've spoken with colleagues in America about doing something similar, and there is, it's no, he's obviously been drinking heavily to make a suggestion like that. So I think as innovative a people as Americans are and can be, I think when it comes to zoo design, they're actually quite conservative. So
I can't speak to that as I don't have that knowledge. But you also said it addressed some undesired behaviors,
yeah,
such as the
sorry.
repetitive behaviors.
And this is the key one. The gender that is most affected by stereotypic behavior are male polar bears, and in particular when in breeding situations. So the male will get the female pregnant. The female will then be separated off around about October. And then she'll be rearing the cubs for about 2 to 3 years. All that time, she's perfectly entertained. She's got her hands full dealing with 1 or 2, or very occasionally 3 cubs. And the male, who has been used to company, is now on his own. For if it's a continual breeding situation, he's on his own for 3 years out of 4. And in general, the zoo will want to have the mother and cubs in their primary polar bear exhibit. So the male might be sectioned off to some second-rate, less than ideal environment. And so what I wanted to do was make sure we got away from that. It's also a situation with male elephants, which I think we still need to go some way towards addressing. But we also know that male polar bears, like pretty much all male bears, are much more sociable than female bears. So what I wanted to do was change the whole social dynamic, and that in some ways more closely mirroring what happens in the wild, and that the male enclosure is in one part of the park, female enclosure is way on the other side of the park. And the male enclosure is for 2 males. Female enclosure, she's on her own, otherwise she'll have cubs. But male polar bears, more than a mate, they need a wrestling partner. And we have seen this now. And I was told, oh, it won't last. And they'll eventually there'll start to be lots of aggression. That's not the case. Now that might be down to big enclosures, but then there are 1 or 2 other institutions. There's a place in Australia that has been keeping 2 brothers together with a female next door for quite some years. All seems to work well. There's 2 males together at Warsaw Zoo. There are a few examples, and people historically kept polar bears in big groups. They didn't breed them, but if you old pictures of polar bears in zoos from the 50s and 60s, it was not unusual to see groups of 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 polar bears in really very small concrete enclosures with minimal aggression. So the managing the 2 boys together has gone against the grain as far as many traditionalists within the zoo communities are concerned, but it absolutely works. And Yorkshire Wildlife Park, they, having copied the design, they just manage male polar bears. And they have a bit of a fission fusion setup where the boys will get on really well for a while, then one might want to separate off. But again, their enclosures are on a very large scale. So they have that spatial flexibility for the animals to socially distance. And that's the key.
And so it's just because the males are engaging with each other and they're not anxious about where the female is, and they, those are the reasons why you think they're less likely to do the repetitive behaviors.
It's the classic one of in the UK, it's illegal to lock your animals on exhibit. They have to be able to get somewhere where they're out of sight of visitors or their enclosure mates or whatever. And people are, oh, well, if we don't lock them out, they'll spend all their time indoors. But we also know that if an animal knows that its safe area is easily accessible, it is going to be more inclined to be out in the open in the area that might present more risks, because it knows it always has this safe refuge to go to. So I think that's also part of it. I mean, there's a second enclosure that the bears can separate off to, but I walked around the zoo at 6 and 7 o'clock at night, and the two males are sound asleep, basically entwined in each other. So, they male polar bears are more social creatures. All of those images that we're all familiar with, from bears at the garbage dump outside Churchill, on the whole, they are all male polar bears. The females with the cubs, they're way the hell outside the town, because obviously the males are a risk for their offspring. But male polar bears, they like each other's company. And if you look at the works of Ian Sterling or Andy DeRoche on the long-term studies on bear behavior in Manitoba, the play fighting, the wrestling, the just generally hanging out together that the boys do is well documented. And so I had little concern that I was going to have a problem duplicating that option for the boys at the Highland Wildlife Park.
I think that's really fascinating. I really find repetitive behavior, I think a lot of people just don't understand it very well, and their inclination is to just throw enrichment at animals. And so that's one of the things we worked on with the animal training working group for IAZA, is we prepared a document to help people ask the right questions instead of just saying, well, we just need to throw enrichment at it. And I like that you really thought through the process and tried to address it appropriately by saying, well, what is the function of that? Why is that animal doing that behavior? And can I give the animal what it needs so that it doesn't have the need to do that behavior? So I think that's a really great strategy.
I mean, the classic error is, okay, how do you stop stereotyping animals? Well, you put some kind of obstacle in the way of their path, and there's been all kinds of ridiculous solutions over the years that have been presented, which were farcical from day one. But it just, stopping and thinking and watching can more often than not at least give an indication, if not indeed an answer for what's the trigger. Why are they doing what they're doing? Is there something going on? Is there something out of earshot that we're not picking up that they are? Is there a smell? Is it an individual? Do they have the hate with a particular member of staff? There's a multitude of reasons, but there's always a reason.
Exactly. Yeah, I'll make that document available on the page where this podcast lives, so people can ask those questions, because that's exactly what we have them do. Is you need to ask the right questions so that you find out what the function of the behavior is, so that you can actually provide the right intervention so that you're addressing, because there's always a reinforcer involved. That's why the animal's doing it. It's not just coming out of thin air. And like you said, putting in an object to block the path just causes the animal to do it someplace else. You're just blocking the response. You're not actually addressing the reason why the animal is doing the behavior.
Exactly.
Oh, I love that. So what about enclosure designs that you see that actually create behavior problems? When you walk around a place and you visit and you see something and you're like, oh, that's creating the problem. Like just the way if you were visiting a place and you're saying, oh, I would change that because that is what's creating the problem. Do you see examples of that?
I think the one that annoys me the most is, this is a classic example of people not being familiar with the basic literature that what we do is based on. And one goes to a zoo and you see an exhibit, and the animals are, they might sitting in the almost the perfect center, as far away from the perimeter as possible. And you look at it, and visitors have access all the way around. And it's just, and I've, from, Heidegger's work, either Wild Animals in Captivity or zoo biology, Man and Animal in the Zoo, one of the classics is restrict visitors to ideally no more than two sides of the enclosure. So at least the animal has a backdrop, a safe area that they can put their back up to, and any threat that they perceive is in front of them. It's not all around them. And it never fails to amaze and disappoint me that I will see this in facilities. I just got sent a design for a brand spanking new common hippo facility. And if you actually did some Photoshop on the pictures I received and yellowed them up a little bit, you could easily be fooled into thinking that you were looking at London Zoo's Victorian hippo facility. It was all concrete and mainly pool. So you had maybe 20% barren land area to 80% pool, and that was the truth both inside and out. But to add insult to injury, visitors, not only were they looking from the front, both the inside and the outside. On the outside, there was a raised walkway that went all the way around the enclosure. So basically, the hippos, if outside, would be completely surrounded by visitors, and with a significant percentage of them being above them, not even just at eye level, but above them. So one, they completely missed the concept of giving the animals at least some level of security. And two, they completely missed the fact that, yes, hippos spend their day in the water, they spend their night outside grazing. So there was basically no land area to speak of, and you wonder why hippos in classic exhibits like that are generally incredibly overweight. If you look at your average adult common hippo in captivity as opposed to the wild, you can, even if it's a close shot, you can actually tell the difference, and it's the amount of daylight between the ground and the bottom of their belly. Sticking with imperial measurements, on a captive hippo, you'd be looking, if you're lucky, about between 6 and 8 inches of clearance underneath the animal, whereas in a wild individual, you're looking at between a foot and a half of clearance, because they're actually quite trim.
So you got me thinking here again about exhibit design, because I'm not as good at that as you, because that's something I see all the time. But sometimes people ask for my input on things like door placement and, we're going to do training over here. And I definitely see things that I'm like, oh, don't put the doors over there, because how are you going to train the animal to go through that? It's so far away. You have no way to give the animal information. I want you to go through that door. It's as far away from a keeper as possible. Or I think, oh, you're asking a ground dwelling animal to go through a door that's up high, or vice versa. Or like you're asking a troop of monkeys that, like to be arboreal to go through something that's down on the ground, or you don't have enough doors and you're going to ask all the animals to go through one door, and the group dynamics are not going to make that work. Do you have things like that you're addressing when, you have to think about the behavior of the animal so that there's not competition and things are going to flow? Do those kind of things come into design for you as well?
You have very neatly segued into my second hate, and that is door design. First and foremost, guillotine doors, vertical sliding doors should be abolished. They are dangerous. The animals have been injured and killed. The times when keepers have to use them, or the cable breaks at the most inconvenient of times. If you want to make an animal door shy, then you have someone operating a guillotine door and not actually seeing exactly what's going on, or closing it too quickly, catching a tail, never mind the lower back. So I'm a strong advocate of horizontal sliding doors.
Thank you so much for saying that. As an animal trainer, I am so for that as well, because you can do small approximations as far as training goes too, so you don't get those fear responses. It's so hard to do small approximations with guillotine doors. Even if you have the perfect design where you can do small increments, it just never seems
But
to,
then
to
they can
work.
still
So
get underneath
thank
it
you.
and flip it up. It also presents a huge hazard for staff. I've had animals lift guillotine doors, and I've had to get out of the way fairly sharpish. But the other one on horizontal sliding doors is they should be designed so they are pull to close, not push to close. And the reason is, and this would have from a training point of view, if you have an animal that's particularly nervous of having a keeper standing quite close to the door, if it's pulled to close, you can hook a rope onto it, and so the operator can stand at a distance and then incrementally get closer and closer to the actual operating handle, as the animal calms down and becomes more familiar with the staff and the setup. So yeah, horizontal sliding doors that pull to close. Having doors in the middle of fence lines. If you are trying to, particularly in an emergency, you want to try and corral animals into an area, having your door in the middle of a fence line or the middle of a building wall, as opposed to a corner where the animals are more likely to be funneled down, where with a little bit of coaxing, the animal can get the idea and follow a line down to where the door is, as opposed to blindly running past the door in the middle of a straight line. You touched on the idea of multiple doors. Yes, if you have big groups of animals, and there are very strict hierarchies, you want the capacity for everybody. For one, you don't want one door where a dominant animal can just sit there and stop other animals from going in and out. So you want multiple doors. You ideally, and even for a range of species, you want doors at different heights, not just high doors for arboreal animals or low doors for more terrestrial species. I think, we find that for most animals, their behavior, particularly in a captive environment, can be far more plastic. And so therefore having a range of options and ramps and perching to get to different heights of doors or whatever it might be, or having, visual partitions between two doors. So the dominant animal might think he's holding everybody back, but everybody can sneak in the other way. And also with from a training perspective, quite often with animals, you might have multiple trainers dealing with an individual animal all at the same time. You want them all to station somewhere or come through a particular door somewhere. So having a choice of entries into different areas. I mean, that's one of the comments I get is like, Douglas, in your designs, why are there always so many bloody doors? And basically, I look at it from the point of view of you want to be able to deal with any scenario. You ideally want to be able to move an animal from A to C without going through B, because there's another animal in B that really hates the animal that's in A. You want that complete capacity to run round in circles or to bypass or to go over the top or whatever it might be. So it's flexibility in positioning with multiple doors. But how the door actually works, I think, is quite key. I'm not a huge fan of doors that are operated by some kind of mechanism, machinery, be it electric or hydraulic. I think probably the worst example was in a big cat house in a zoo. and they had, I think it was hydraulic doors, and they were vertical, but they closed up as opposed to closing down. And twice they killed a tiger. Also because the operating position, the keeper couldn't see, there was no direct line of sight. So they're operating the buttons thinking that the cat has come through, and the cat actually just stopped. Or the number of ape houses where an orang male has punched a door just enough to get the tips of his fingers in there and haul the door back, and destroy the mechanism. Or, I mean, it's more to break. You want to keep it simple, so it's easy to fix and less likely to break.
Yeah, I also like the sensitivity you can have with a door that's manually moved, I guess is the word. Again, as a trainer, I like because training is so much about, timing and being able, if it's a door that's well built and, is smooth and operates nicely, and that you can very nicely slide it and move it in relation to what that animal is doing, and being able to reinforce. So as a trainer, those wonderful doors that move like that, I like so much more than having to push a button and hope that it stops at the exact moment. And usually it's very loud and noisy and jerky, and not as nice as that door that slides so perfectly.
Well, the other situation with doors that are electric or hydraulically driven, is in emergencies. And if you need to close a door quickly, you cannot close it quickly. They operate at a set pace. And so you want a manually operated door that you can shut fast when you need to. And anyone who's been in the zoo business for any length of time anyone will be able to cite any number of examples where, thank God we were able to close that door quickly, or we had that option, or whatever it might be. Yeah, and this is the other thing with zoo design. You have to consider worst case scenario, the what ifs, and you have to try and okay, what are all the what ifs? And I don't, and in zoo design, I don't go along with the Rumsfeld approach of the unknown unknowns. If you apply your mind to it, you will be able to come up with all of the possibilities. There should be no surprises as to, oh, well, I didn't think they'd be able to do that, or what if they got stuck in this area, or whatever it might be.
So I have another one for you, because this, to me, again, also relates a little bit to training. Doing hoof care and foot care on so many animals is quite popular in animal training these days. But I would think that substrate selection is a very important factor in this. So what do you often consider when you're selecting substrate for the different species that you have worked with?
I mean, probably the best species to look at from that perspective are giraffes. They're big. You ideally want to avoid knocking them down as much as possible. They can be quite nervous, and they are prone to do stupid things, which will cause themselves injury. And so you ideally, and this would be true of anything, the enclosure should be designed in such a way so it minimizes the need to manipulate or treat the animal because of some deficiency. So London Zoo, the old giraffe enclosure, which dates back to the 1830s, not the biggest giraffe enclosure in the world, but during my time there, we had a substrate called breed and gravel, and you have to lay it properly, and then you soak it and roll it and soak it, and you get it to the point where it's like hard packed gravel, we never had a hoof problem with giraffes, other than with a particularly old individual. And I think a lot of that was actually down to the fact that she had started to have arthritic issues, and so she was less mobile than the younger giraffes, who all kept their hoofs in absolutely tip-top, pristine condition without us touching them at all. So we know with Indian rhino that they are prone to significant foot lesions if they are not on a soft and springy substrate. So be it bark chip or mulch or something like that, that should be what they're on. Elephants, any new elephant facility in Europe is all now, it's all deep sand, like a meter and a half, or a yard and a half deep sand that you have to be able to manage. But it's, that to avoid all of the traditional arthritic problems or split nails that we have all seen way too many times with the likes of elephants. So it's a combination of, and particularly with hoof stock, it is to get the substrate right will enhance the physical care that the animals need, and certainly reduce the amount of care that the keepers or the trainers need to apply, or the vet teams. The other aspect is also from a feeding point of view. If you're looking at substrates with primates or whatever, then you want to do scatter feeds on a bare concrete floor or a floor with substrate, where the seed or whatever you're scattering can disappear, and they really do have to look for it. A bare concrete floor, they're going to be able to find everything very, very quickly. So concrete has been probably the most common building material used in zoos, certainly on floors. And it's one that we need to get away from. And a lot of it is down to, there's a level of paranoia and misunderstanding and a hyper requirement for hygiene. And there was an excellent paper published in the early 1980s by a chap called Chamoth. And it's basically, he argues about having deep litter, deep bark chip for primates, and the need to actually replace it. It helps deal with parasite problems, because the bark chip itself, because it's constantly breaking down, it creates quite an acidic environment. So you actually reduce parasite load by keeping your animals on, your primates, on bark chip, rather than on a smooth, hard floor that you can disinfect the hell out of every day. You don't need, so actually cuts down keeper time, so they can spend more time doing animal stuff as opposed to janitorial duties. So again, it's having an understanding of not only the behavior of the animals, but what are the problems that we've had to deal with in managing these animals in the various generations of enclosure design that they have been kept in. And I think this is where I'm going back to where I think it's incredibly important that people have a good grounding in zoo history, and so that they understand, one, where their profession has come from, how it's developed. And just because something was published before the internet was invented doesn't necessarily make it a useless document. There's these big buildings, and what are they called again? Oh yeah, libraries, and they have books in them. And every zoo I have worked at, and I go into the library, and invariably I have the whole thing to myself because no one else is using it.
Oh, goodness. All right. Well, I'm going to switch to another topic that I think is near and dear to both of our hearts. And this is about conservation. I know you've worked on a number of projects that involve wildlife conservation. And I was hoping you might share some of those projects and how some of the habitat design that you've done has contributed to those animals being successful and the conservation of those species.
Okay. I suppose the one that would be most pertinent, and certainly I think is starting to open doors to other possibilities when it comes to breeding, particularly for reintroduction. And that's with the Amur leopard breeding facility that I designed and built at the Highland Wildlife Park. And no one had really done anything like that to date. And as far as reintroduction was concerned, the difficulty across the species range was always identified as being big carnivores. They were the ones that were where it was going to present the most difficulties, not least of which because these things are capable of killing people. And so, you know, how do you produce captive bred big carnivores that are suitable candidates for reintroduction? And with the Amur leopard project, I mean, I was asked the question back in the early 1990s when I worked at London Zoo by the then coordinator of the tiger and Amur leopard programs. It's like, okay, if you were gonna reintroduce tigers, how would you do it? And so I came up with a model for large very large off-exhibit areas in or near the habitat that we're going to be reintroduced to. And you have your zoo-bred animals there, and they produce offspring. You are feeding them on a natural diet, ideally live. The enclosures are big enough that, you know, that human interference is kept down to as close to zero as is possible, so that the young animals the young cats don't become habituated to seeing people or associating them with supplying food or anything like that. And then eventually you would, as they hit dispersal age, you'd remove the original breeding animals, and eventually you'd drop a couple of the fence panels, and then you would allow the young cats to drift out into the wild. So nice soft release. So this was always the intention, and certainly for the Amur leopards, the reintroduction plan became a reality. I mean, at the time we were looking at a wild population of 25 to 30 individuals left in the Russian Far East, maybe a half a dozen over the border in China, almost definitely none in North Korea. And so it was like, okay, this is going to be the big cat reintroduction project. So they basically, they dusted off my model for tigers. They'd adapted it for leopards, basically the same process. And when I got to the Highland Wildlife Park, because we just did cold weather adapted animals, the coordinator said, look, you know, we want high quality facilities for Amur leopards. You know, if you guys want to become part of the program, we'll supply you with animals for breeding, etc. And we've seen your polar bear and your tiger enclosures, and the big and high quality, you know, they're ideal. And so I started to design an Amur leopard exhibit. And then it occurred to me that actually I could cut out the middleman because of the large natural site that we were on. That I could basically create that breeding enclosure in a wild animal park situation. We could feed the youngsters a natural diet. We could avoid any human contact that was anyway viewed as positive. And so we could actually breed leopards in the UK that would be eligible for going into soft release enclosures in Russia. And so I designed the facility, we built it. It's about 7,000, 8,000 square yards, two big enclosures. And so leopards, if you're going to have a big enclosure, putting a roof on it is going to really add to the price. So how do you create leopard proof barrier? So we had 3 meters, about 9 feet or so of chain link fencing, and then a smooth metal barrier of about 2 meters, about 6 feet on the top. So basically, it's an anti-climb barrier. So 15 foot barrier, and this proved to be very effective. There were large natural areas that we enclosed. There was it was actually within a very mature planted area at the back of the park, and so there was almost like a natural visual screen around it. I created a 15-acre enclosure for Sika deer, which I brought in from a zoo in England. So we had a natural food supply. Now, because of where we were going to make sure that the cubs never ate domestic food, domestic livestock. So they were on, red deer, Sika deer, wild pheasant, wild rabbit, which is exactly the primary prey species that Amur leopards would subsist on in the Russian Far East. And so building this prototype, no one had done it before. So for me, that was quite exciting. It worked. We introduced a pair of leopards, they bred, we got cubs, they're still in there at the moment, and we're just, this possibility of that one will be going out to Russia and one might be going to a project in South Korea as a breeding animal. It was interesting after a year or two of doing a review of it and thinking, okay, right, on plan B, on the next phase of doing something like that, I would use different types of posts. There's a definite need for a fairly intensive camera system for monitoring the animals because you're basically keeping hands off, but the keepers still have to make very timely decisions of when to put the pair together, when to separate them. The female disappeared. We didn't see her with the naked eye for 6 months. We saw her on camera, and we only had little camera traps. So it was a matter of the keepers sneaking up, getting the chip out, coming back down, having a look at it. All right, she came in for a drink of water or whatever. But it also allowed me to develop a design for a non-building building. And because we're looking at Amur leopards in a climate that they had adapted to deal with, do we really need a building? It was like, no, we need somewhere to manage them into if we need to contain them. And it needs to be moderately weatherproof. And so we basically ended up building these wire cubes with a lightweight metal roof over the top. And then we had lightweight wood paneling on outside 2 sides, just off where the prevailing winds were coming from. And then, a natural substrate bark chip on the floor. We didn't want the big enclosures. We didn't want to dig the fence in. So we brought the fence, and it was an idea that I got originally from when I worked at the Bronx Zoo as a keeper. They had a problem with feral dogs getting into wild Asia, which was an area across the Bronx River from the main part of the zoo. And so they had the stock fencing coming down, and then it would roll out horizontally for about, for a yard and a half, just on the ground and pinned down. Because if an animal is going to dig at a fence, it'll go up to the vertical section, then start digging. It doesn't start digging 3 or 4 feet back and then go underneath. So I've started it. So it's coming up with ways that facilities can be built cheaply and easily and of a suitable size. Because you got to remember there's going to be a period of 18 months, 2 years, where you're not going to be able to clean those enclosures. So they need to be big enough to be able to absorb the waste, or for the piles of feces or bones not to present a health issue for the animals. And to be perfectly frank, when it comes to carnivores, more young carnivores have died from clean cages than from dirty ones, because staff going in there to deal with them, when in actual fact they should have just left things alone so the offspring get reared. Female carnivores don't like to be disturbed.
So were they able to move animals then over to the other countries and have any success?
That's actually in the process now.
Oh, okay.
And so, and it was what triggered the Koreans to contact me to help them start to build their facilities. I had a meeting with our Russian counterparts earlier this week. And we had a Zoom meeting along with the coordinator of the EP, and it's really starting to build up some momentum. So as with a lot of these things, it's taken longer, and in the meantime, there was the reintroduction project for the Persian leopard in Sochi in Russia, and there was a number of difficulties with that particular project and how they've approached it. And so we've actually got a good example of, okay, here's other things we need to avoid. And so we've got good examples of why we need to avoid those things. So basically the Sochi project, its deficiencies have underlined the areas that I set up for my project, that, okay, we need to do it this way because, the last thing you want to do is release a big carnivore and for them to roll up into the first village that they come across and, kill somebody's dog or, God forbid, their kid. That you talk about killing a conservation project stone dead. That's how you do that. So you want to create a situation where you vastly reduce the likelihood of that happening. So basically we're on the cusp of that becoming a reality.
So close though. But there's a lot of work that's already been done. So steps forward for sure.
Yeah.
That's exciting. Yes. Well, this has been an incredible hour of information. I hope that it's been fun for you.
No, very enjoyable.
Yay. So you need to tell people where they can find you if they are looking for information and ready to move forward with design or anything consulting wise with their zoo.
Well, I may know quite a bit about solving zoo problems. I'm probably the world's worst business person. I don't advertise. I have no website. The only thing I've ever done was actually got a bunch of business cards printed up. All the work I get is in general from word of mouth, but I am contactable on my email account, and that is Douglas_Richardson@hotmail.com.
In any case, I will make sure your contact information is available on this episode webpage. I know I learned a lot getting to talk to you some more, and hopefully we'll get to meet again in person maybe next year if all goes well with vaccinations and all. It would be great to catch up again in person and find out more about each other's adventures. Yay. All right. Well, thank you so much. I always want to call you Sir Douglas Richardson. I think you need a sir in front of your name.
I'm waiting on the knighthood to come through.
Okay.
But it hasn't quite happened yet.
All right, I think we're going to cut off that interview right there as we have just knighted Douglas Richardson. He is now Sir Douglas Richardson for you and for me and for everyone else out there. Wasn't that a great interview? I learned so much. I think some of the things that really impacted me is I love that new approach to housing polar bears. We often hear about the impact of enclosures and repetitive behavior, and I think that was really significant how Douglas researched that and was able to make an impact on that behavior. So again, it really goes back to exploring the causes of those undesired behaviors and what we can do to address those. So it isn't just, as simple as saying, oh, it's animals being in managed care that cause that. It's more complex than that. So I think that was a really important discussion. I loved our discussion on doors. That was huge for me. And there were so many things there, and I had even more questions too, but it was already an hour into it. So I think I'm going to have to ask Douglas to come back and speak with us again if he has the time. But again, all those years of experience, all that studying of animal behavior, and especially how animals behave in the wild, and how he brings that into his work, working with the zoological community, and of course, bringing it all back around to animal conservation and helping animals that are dwindling in the wild. So I hope this was inspiring to you. It really was for me. It really, again, goes back to how important ethology is and our knowledge about animal behavior and how we can use that to help the animals that we're working with in managed care. And again, tying it back into inspiring people to care about animals in the wild. So what a knowledgeable man, and really a privilege for all of us to benefit from his knowledge and years of experience. So a great big thank you to Douglas Richardson for participating in this podcast today. And I hope you all will join me again next time, where I have some more wonderful special guests here on Animal Training Fundamentals. All right. Thank you all, and we'll talk to you again soon.
If you liked what you heard today, visit animaltrainingfundamentals.com for more quality content on animal training. You'll find courses, community, and extensive video examples from my consulting work around the world. We'd love to have you join our force-free family.